3 explosions in Saad al-Jabari Square in Aleppo killed 33 citizens and injured dozens. Our armed forces inflict heavy losses on terrorists in different areas. The People's Assembly is briefed on the government's assessment of the economic and service situation. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our news for today. 3 booby-trapped cars exploded this morning, driven by suicide bombers in Saad al-Jabari Square in Aleppo, killing and wounding dozens of citizens. The first and second cars were detonated near Al-Nadi Sahi Club, killing 33 people and injuring scores of others, leaving huge material damage on the sites of the explosion. The 2 blasts occurred simultaneously with mortar guns shelling by terrorists in center of the square and in Al-Hal market. 3 armed men with explosive belts wearing Syrian army military uniforms then entered the place from the northern side of the hotel. The army handled the situation and eliminated them. The third car was driven by a suicide bomber as well. It exploded in Tajmil, Masharika neighborhood, after it had been the target of fire shooting by the guards who were in the place. No casualties were reported. Also in Aleppo, terrorists Haji Abdul Rahman, the Mufti of the armed terrorist groups, was killed in Al-Kallasa neighborhood in Bistan al-Qasr in an army operation. An army unit also killed Abu Duraid and Abu Nazih, leaders of 2 terrorist groups in Jamal Mosque in Al-Kallasa. Meanwhile, our armed forces also destroyed 3 cars equipped with Doshka machine guns in Hayyan neighborhood. Another army unit targeted a terrorist gathering near Sukkar Mosque and Al Yarmouk and Al Karama schools in Al Kallasa and Aleppo, killing and injuring scores of terrorists. Meanwhile, an army unit targeted a group of gunmen near Al Zarzur hospital in the Sukkari region, inflicting heavy losses on them. Competent authorities today set up an ambush for an armed terrorist group inside a car which was terrorizing citizens and committing acts of sabotage in Qalat al-Madiq area in Hama countryside. Sana correspondent quoted a source in the governorate as saying that the competent authorities destroyed the car, killing all the terrorists inside it. In Daraa, competent authorities confiscated large amounts of weapons and killed a large number of terrorists in a Nazihin camp in the city. An army unit confiscated today big amounts of weapons, which included a sniping rifle, RPG launchers, and automatic weapons during an operation against a terrorist hideout in Bala town in Damascus countryside. A military source told Sana correspondent that 2 4-wheel drive cars were destroyed and all the terrorists inside the hideout were killed. The border guards in Ghazala village in Idlib suburbs foiled an infiltration attempt by a terrorist group from Turkish territories into Syria, killing and wounding its members. Several motorcycles used by the terrorists were also destroyed. Some of the armed men fled back into Turkish territories. The same source said an engineering unit detonated an explosive device on the same site. Each weighed between 50 to 75 kilograms, planted by an armed terrorist group. The People's Assembly condemned the terrorist explosions in Aleppo today, which left several martyrs and injured dozens of citizens. Assembly Speaker Muhammad Jihad Al-Ham branded the blast as an ugly crime that targeted innocent civilians and implementation of the plot of terrorists who had no fear of God, who alleged to be Muslims but were actually far from any Islamic value. He reiterated condemnation of such crimes and of the states that stand behind the terrorists. The Assembly was later briefed on the government's assessment of the internal situation in Syria. Minister of Agriculture Subhi Abdullah talked in detail about the farm work and the losses sustained by the agricultural sector as a result of the armed groups' terrorist acts which targeted the establishments affiliated to the Ministry of Agriculture. Minister of Oil and Mineral Wealth Sayyid Moza Hunaidi surveyed the oil situation in Syria and the damages resulting from the acts of sabotage that befell the sector of oil and the impact of Western sanctions on Syrian citizens. On his part, Minister of Electricity Ahmad Khamis reviewed the mechanism of the ministry's work in the upcoming phase. Several People's Assembly members presented interventions on various economic, political, and social issues. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has underlined the need for implementing what was agreed upon in Geneva last June concerning the crisis in Syria. In a press interview, Lavrov said future development of the situation in Syria will be determined by the order of priorities embraced by concerned parties. He pointed out that the situation in Syria can develop into two scenarios only, adding that it is simple yet dangerous to choose any one of them. Lavrov affirmed that if priority number one is to save the lives of the Syrians, then what was agreed upon in Geneva must be implemented. That is, to compel all parties to stop the violence and sit at the negotiating table. However, if priority number one is to determine the regime in Syria, we are not capable of doing anything to help, and the UN Security Council does not resort to such practices which run counter to its jurisdiction. The U.S. State Department affirmed that the U.S. has no plans for a military intervention in Syria. The spokeswoman for the U.S. State Department, Victoria Nuland, said in reply to a question about Russia's warning against any Western intervention in Syria, especially creating no-fly zones or isolated safe corridors, that the U.S. has made it clear that it is just offering what she called non-lethal support to the Syrian opposition. In Libya, as the security situation is deteriorating, acts of violence rose up. News sources said that one person was killed and 5 others wounded during the clashes which broke out between armed militants from Misrata and other groups from Bani Walid. Intense fighting centered in east of Wadi Mardoun, northeast of the country. Finally, Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez pledged to redouble his efforts to establish a system that serves the interests of all citizens of Venezuela in case he won the upcoming presidential elections. Chavez told his supporters in his native town, Sabaneta, that his presidential term in the next 6 years will witness bigger changes. The Venezuelan president affirmed that his country has laid the socialist foundation for the 21st century and will launch even more profound changes in the future. With this, we end our news bulletin for today. For more information about Syria and the region, you can visit our website in English, syriaonline.sy. Up next, the latest business, our market news with Khalid after the break.